ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi, this is ABC News Daily, and if you're listening, I'm Matt Bevan. I'm in Washington DC this morning. It is an unseasonably bright, stunning, sunny day here coming up to lunchtime, and yet for a lot of people who were up all night watching the election, it is breakfast time. This is a crossover episode of both ABC News Daily and If You're Listening to update you on what you've missed overnight. And honestly, the main thing that you have missed is that every news network in the world, including us at the ABC, now project for certain that former President Donald Trump will be the next President of the United States. Like many media types and political junkies, I am in a cafe at the moment, sucking down a large coffee and hoeing into some breakfast, and so is Dr. Emma Shortis, an expert in the history and politics of the United States at the Australia Institute. Good morning, Emma.
Good morning, Matt.
We'll get into talking about the President-elect in a minute, but I want to start with Kamala Harris's campaign. You were at the Harris campaign event here in Washington last night, as a motorbike goes past, at her alma mater in Howard University. What was it like there?
I mean, initially, Matt, it was quite a joyous, might be going too far, but it was an excited atmosphere. You know, there were so many young people there, clearly students at Howard University, who were kind of bubbling away with a quiet excitement. It was packed. There were American flags everywhere. The Jumbotron was on and it was alternating between CNN and really loud pop music. So it had the atmosphere of the beginning of a party. You know, nobody was complacent, but that was the vibe. But it very quickly started to turn. I don't think there was a particular moment where people had this big realisation. It was, I think, when people started to realise that it was going badly was when, CNN was going through the county level counts in the Rust Belt states, so in Pennsylvania and Michigan, and it was becoming clear that Harris was underperforming on Joe Biden's 2020 result, and it really went downhill from there.
When did people start leaving?
So people started leaving at about 11 or 11:30, and then when they called North Carolina, that was it. People were heading out very quickly. It wasn't over then. I think people hadn't reconciled themselves to the fact that Trump was going to win. It was just that it was clear Harris's path was becoming very narrow, and a lot of people had left before her campaign co-chair came out and said that she wasn't going to appear that night. So it was very tense. People were holding themselves very, very carefully.
What did people think when that announcement was made that she wouldn't speak? That surprised me, that she decided not to come out and address them in any way, not necessarily to concede, but even just to say, all right, well, looks like we're in for a long fight, we'll see you tomorrow, that kind of thing. How did people feel about that, do you think?
I think there were mixed feelings about that. I think people weren't all that surprised that she wasn't coming out then because it was still so close. Her campaign co-chairs were clearly, still scrambling to figure out what the pathway might be and if it existed. So I think people weren't surprised. And honestly, I think probably, they were more focused on the potential result and their building disappointment there necessarily than Harris herself. But I did also see some real disappointment that she didn't come out and speak. Some takes kind of characterising it as disrespectful, which, I'm not sure about. I think that's probably a little bit unfair. But I wasn't surprised that she didn't come out and speak, because we didn't have a result. She wasn't likely to come out and concede. And I think they were just really waiting to see what would happen.
Throughout the night and into the morning, pundits across the American media have started throwing accusations around, trying to figure out whose fault it is that Kamala Harris lost this election. Do we have any clarity yet over where the media's blame is likely to end up?
Yeah, look, I think, Matt, it's really important to say at the outset that the zone will be flooded with certainty in the next few weeks about what's happened, about whose fault it is, about why we've got this result. But actually untangling the threads of American politics is so difficult, if not impossible, and we have to pay attention to the local factors as well, I think, that have given us this result. I think it's likely, and actually it's kind of already happening, that particularly kind of centrist elements in both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, those Republicans that supported Harris, will make the argument that she was too progressive, that she, needed to spend more time with Liz Cheney in Pennsylvania, for example, in order to appeal to those swing voters and particularly to white women who look like they've gone to Trump again. So I think there will be a lot of finger pointing there. I think there is also quite a strong argument emerging that, potentially the opposite is true, that Harris tacked too far to the centre, that she, spent too much time with Liz Cheney and not enough time listening to voters in Michigan who had been very clear about what they wanted from the Harris campaign, especially in its policy towards Israel. And looking at numbers this morning, noting that they're interim numbers, it looks like Harris has lost Michigan by somewhere around 100,000 votes, which is the same number of people who put down uncommitted rather than vote for Joe Biden in the primaries because of Israel. And I'd also note that Rashida Tlaib, the representative from Michigan, was elected on a huge majority, as was Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, both elected on huge majorities. So the progressive wing of the party will be arguing very hard that that was a huge error on the part of their campaign, and they've got ground to stand on.
So basically you're saying that what's going to happen is like most of the time everyone is going to say the problem is that they didn't listen to me.
Of course, that's there are so many self-interested politicians in this. What probably won't happen and has a history of not happening in the Democratic Party is a deeper reflection on the structural issues that got them here, and particularly the inability of the Democratic Party to have an answer for the economic inequality and economic stagnation that still plagues the United States. Democrats don't have a satisfying or adequate answer for the Bill Clinton administration's role in dramatically restructuring American economy and what that meant for so many people in the Rust Belt. I think that at least partly explains why the Democrats have been rejected so soundly. And Matt, they have. They've lost the House, they've lost the Senate, and they've lost the presidency. That is extraordinary.
All in one evening, really. There's a million questions that I could ask about the Democrats, and we could keep unpacking them. Undoubtedly we will. Keep unpacking what exactly happened here for months and months. But let's move on to Donald Trump. Obviously, neither of us were at his event. It was in Florida at Mar-a-Lago. But he did speak to his supporters in the early evening Australian time. What have we learned from his side about where they think they went right, as opposed to where Kamala Harris went wrong?
Well, I think they'll think they did everything right because they've got such a good result. Trump last night gave a call out, of course, to Elon Musk, to his apparently genius political organising and communication skills, and I think there will be, rightly, a lot of time spent dissecting the role that Twitter has played in all of this, and Elon Musk in particular. But the Trump campaign will feel that their tactic of appealing to and mobilising the quote-unquote manosphere has worked, and has resulted in a once-in-a-generation victory for the right in the United States.
I guess the interesting thing about that courting of the manosphere, and by that we're talking about, listeners of kind of bro-y podcasts where they talk about boxing and UFC and Joe Rogan, that sort of thing, is I think a lot of people were expecting that there would be a counter backlash to that among women, and it doesn't really seem like we've seen that.
It doesn't at this stage. I think we have to wait for some clearer numbers around turnout. Exit polls are shifty. You've got to be careful with exit polls, but at least initially it does look like women's turnout, as many, including myself, thought would be critical to Harris, would get her potentially over the line in some of those critical battlegrounds like North Carolina, which also has a really draconian abortion ban. That just appears to have not turned out, and it looks at the moment like white women in particular, white suburban women, have gone to Trump in a similar way that they did in 2016. And in some cases that may be because abortion measures in some states were on the ballot, so there was a way for voters to vote against draconian abortion bans while still supporting Donald Trump's other policies. And Trump has been really effective at giving people that kind of wriggle room where they can, reconcile apparently irreconcilable things and still vote for him. And it looks like that has worked, and perhaps his assurances that, he won't sign or he won't allow a national abortion ban to be legislated was enough for those particular voters who, for other reasons, for economic reasons or for white grievance reasons or whatever reasons, were inclined to vote for him. He was effective. I think, at giving them enough room to justify or to reconcile what seems like irreconcilable things.
The argument was made in 2016 that Trump won by accident. Nobody really thought that he would win. Potentially people might not have turned out because they thought that Hillary Clinton was such a sure thing. He lost the popular vote by some margin, and people blamed the Clinton campaign strategy and found a million reasons to argue that he didn't have a mandate to implement his policy agenda. That argument can't really be made now, can it?
I don't think so, Matt. The Republicans have won the presidency, they've won the House, they've won the Senate, and they've already got the Supreme Court, and this means that they'll hold on to it for potentially generations. So I don't know how you can argue that that's not a mandate. You can make very solid evidence-based arguments about the undemocratic nature of the democratic system here in the United States, but that's a different argument and it won't be particularly effective, especially in the next couple of weeks. So, I think Trump will think he's got a mandate, and particularly the people beneath and around him are convinced that they've got a mandate, and that will mean almost kind of what will be seen as a total victory will mean that far-right movement that's kind of coalesced behind Trump is unleashed. It's got nothing stopping it, and implementing its plans of clearing out the federal bureaucracy, of doing things like dismantling the Environmental Protection Agency and all those quite detailed policy plans that Trump doesn't care about at all. They will be getting to work on that with, as you say, a pretty clear mandate from the American people.
I mean, the implications for the way that the American government works is quite broad and extraordinary, given the people that he has aligned himself with, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., apparently coming in to control, health and food supply, that kind of thing. Elon Musk promising to come in and run some sort of a government efficiency drive, cut $2 trillion from the deficit coming into... Not to mention Donald Trump's kind of signature plan, which is to implement massive tariffs on imports, not to mention his plan to deport people, which it's unclear exactly the mechanism of how he's going to get that to work. But all of those things, he can quite clearly argue that he's been elected to do those things specifically.
Yeah, and I mean, he was very clear about those plans, particularly about mass deportation plans. He's said that in every single stump speech about how he's going to implement the biggest mass deportation in American history. And, there were questions about whether he could do that just from the executive office, what kind of powers he would have to do that. But if he's got the House and the Senate and the presidency, then there's not a lot stopping him from doing that. There is the court system as well, because, of course there will be legal challenges to those kinds of policies that will hold them up. But his pathway to doing it is fairly clear. It will create chaos, I think, the attempt to implement that kind of policy, economic chaos, and of course chaos amongst American families. But they are committed to it. And, Stephen Miller, Trump's surrogate, is by his side and raring to go, and he in particular, I think, has learnt the quote-unquote lessons of the first Trump administration and won't make the same kinds of mistakes they did the first time around.
Kamala Harris is the person who will need to certify the results of this election on January 6th. She has spent the last 3 months basically calling Donald Trump a fascist. How can she reconcile peacefully handing over power to a man that she and her entire campaign and all of her campaign surrogates say is a dangerous authoritarian and a fascist?
I don't think you can, but she has to do it, doesn't she? She has been clear from the start that she, unlike Donald Trump, adheres to the rule of law and the American Constitution and respects the will of the people. And so, of course, she has no choice, and I can't imagine a scenario in which she doesn't do that. It will be, I imagine, horrendous for her to do that and heartbreaking for her supporters. I keep thinking about all the young women who were at her rally that I went to in Charlotte in North Carolina and the kind of existential rejection that this result will mean. And so that moment will be heartbreaking for a lot of American people and American women in particular, but she'll do it. She has to. He won the election.
He absolutely did. Emma, thanks so much for coming and having a coffee with me this morning.
My pleasure, Matt.
So, ABC News Daily listeners, I can tell you that you can expect a new episode from Sam Hawley, as usual, in your feed tomorrow, no doubt providing more analysis of this extraordinary election result here in the United States. If you're listening, listeners, I'll be back tomorrow as well with another bonus episode. I want to thank Cara Jensen McKinnon for waking up early to produce this episode. From Washington, D.C., thanks for listening.
Hello, I'm Julia Baird.
And I'm Jeremy Fernandez, and we want to let you know about our pod. It's called Not Stupid, where every week we chat about the stories that we're a bit obsessed with. It's part news, part internet rabbit holes, basically, Jules.
And a lot of chat about poetry and cake, actually. It's called Not Stupid. You can find it on the ABC Listen app.